Hello and welcome back to the Legislative Internship Program's History Club podcast. I'm Ian here with Alf.
Hi there.
That is Alf. And we're doing, on my episode, we're doing the history of the national parks of Washington. We've got a lot of fun historical things about the national parks, and we've also got some fun facts if we have the time.
Sounds very fun. I don't know much about the national parks here, so I'm very eager to learn today.
You won't learn anything.
I will learn so
There
much.
is, there is nothing to learn, actually. We're just going to sit here and make
Podcast over.
Yeah, we're gonna sit here and make bird noises for 30 minutes after this. You have been forewarned. All right, so Washington State, obviously, we have three national parks. We have the North Cascades National Park, we have the Olympic National Park, and we have Mount Rainier National Park. And all three of them are pretty distinct, pretty unique in their own ways. So I'm gonna say we start with North Cascades. Alf, does that work with you?
Sounds good to me. Geographically, where would this be?
This is in the north central region of the state. If you have ever been on the North Cascades Highway, that goes through the North Cascades National Park. It's pretty out of the way, but beautiful area, pretty unspoiled wilderness, which is the way the national park was set up, is to make sure it remains unspoiled wilderness. And I mean, let's get into the history of it because I don't have anything much else to say. All right, and I should also note that most of the information we're using comes from the United States Park Service and the National Park Service. Each of these parks has a lot of good information. If you go to their websites for each of their parks, you can find a lot of stuff about it, even beyond what we're going to be talking about. So I'd recommend doing that as well if you want to learn more after this podcast is over. But North Cascades National Park has been for about the last 5,000 years used by the tribes of Washington State, Upper Skagit tribe, Chilliwack tribe, Lower Thompson and Chelan tribe used the resources of the valley and the passes in the region to get from place to place and all of these things. And, it's a place with a lot of history of human usage, but it wasn't particularly known to the, American people until very late into the 19th or 20th century. It was seen as this, pretty impervious mountain range, pretty difficult to get into, not much to do with it. So it remained very unspoiled for a long period of time. And eventually, within the 19th and 20th centuries, you started to see exploration, you started to see mining and timber cutting. It's a very forested area. You saw dams being put up on the lakes and the rivers of the area there, and you saw a little bit of permanent communities. There's a place called Stehaken up there that you still cannot even reach by road. You have to go on a ferry on Lake Chelan.
Wow.
And there's a bunch of dams on the Skagit River owned by Seattle City Light, and I believe those dams are still up. Although throughout this entire period of early colonial era of the region, you didn't see much permanent occupation, you didn't see much permanent settlement, so the area remained, generally speaking, pretty untouched in a way that a lot of areas were not. And then eventually in the 1920s, during the creation of those dams on the Skagit River, you saw a lot more logging. The Ross Dam was made around that area, and before that was done, all the timber land in the region that would have been submerged by Ross Lake, what is now Ross Lake National Recreation Area, was awarded. So about 12,000 acres of timber were logged between 1945 and 1958 due to the creation of Ross Dam. And still throughout this area, it's primarily not all that known by people who are outside of the region. Just a very difficult place to traverse, and it was made a lot easier to traverse by the creation of State Highway 20, North Cascades Highway, and that opened in 1972. And so that, to a degree, the heavier logging, the creation of the dams, and the creation of the highway started to threaten to, make it less natural, less untouched by, this sort of industrialization we see as the years go on. And so around in 1968, on October 2nd of 1968 to be exact, Congress said, okay, we're going to protect this area of, it was alpine wildernesses, as they said, about 700,000 acres, excuse me, as the North Cascades National Park. And you can see, they had some difficulty with getting the region to become a national park. And if you look at the actual map of the national park, it's actually two separate units, separated by like a minuscule little, I think it's on the Skagit River, just a little spit of land that's not part of the national park, like a little line that runs through it almost. And then the Lake Chelan National Recreation Area is also there, and it's directly to the south of North Cascades National Park, and you can kind of see where some of the controversy with the creation of the national park, obviously mining, logging interests, more dams could have been put in on all of that, and it creates some wonkiness with the borders of the park.
Mhm.
And this is a long process getting to the national park as well. People were arguing, all the way back to 1892 for the creation of a national park north of Lake Chelan. People said it had some of the greatest scenery in the world. One quote was greater than Switzerland's.
Yeah, so I did look up some pictures online for any folks at home who want to do this as well. It's a gorgeous park. It's almost unbelievable how pretty it is, how pristine it looks, almost untouched by human activity, like you mentioned earlier.
That's a lot of the reason why people, I think, were so excited to promote it. Obviously, before roads and more easily accessible places, the area is, unlike a lot of other parts of the Cascade Mountain Range throughout Washington, very difficult to push through in a way. No version of Snoqualmie Pass. They have Mazama Pass, which is where the state highway goes through, but that's a lot that that even closes still to this day in the winter.
Yeah.
It's much more treacherous, much more difficult to access, and because of that, people didn't use it all that much, and it was allowed to be a lot more natural, a lot more as it was.
So I'm actually curious, you mentioned how there was some maybe pushback from creating the national park and then drawing the borders of the national park. How exactly did they kind of confine the park and its borders?
This is to the point where there's a lot of it's primarily a thing related to logging industry, related to, as I said, the dams and all of that, where there is, ooh, look at that. Apologies, everyone. But it's, this sort of industry area, as it's like a very pristine, very natural area at this point. So too is it this is some of the best timberland we have. This is some of the best land for damming, for hydroelectric power, and all of that. So there was some fear that it would damage the local economics, and then there was also some pushback in other departments of the government. Specifically, the Park Service would get the land if it was a national park, and the Forest Service was a little upset about that because prior to that, they had the control over the region related to national forestry and all of that sort of things. It was government land even before it was created as a national park, and the wilderness area was preserved as a national park. And to this day, much of the actual national park itself is designated the Stephen Mather Wilderness, and because of that, it's a lot of just land that is untouched, even less than a typical national park would be, and that's a lot of the reason why to this day it's a very unvisited place. It's got one of the lowest visitations in all of the national parks. I think the only ones that have less people going to it are some of the really Arctic major natural preserves in Alaska,
Yeah.
and those are, as much as they are visitor centers, just ways to preserve massive amounts of land as just natural areas.
Mm-hmm. Have you been to this park?
I have been to the west and the east edges. I've never actually gone through the national park, the whole of highway of State Route 20, but I've been hiking a little bit on the west side, and then I've been hiking a little bit on the east side, coming up through the towns from the Metho Valley through Twisp and Winthrop. Very scenic on both sides, just in general.
Oh yeah, seems great.
Oh yeah, no, it's a delightful place. And before we move on, I will throw off a couple of cool facts about the North Cascades National Park. It's got 9,000 feet of vertical release, and the entirety of the Cascade Crest, the major crest of the Cascade Mountain Range, is through that region of the area is what the park covers. It goes from temperate and wet rainforest on the east side, then after it, it's moving to a dry pioneer forest and all of that, with over 1,600 species on display in the habitats. Of 16,000, that'd be like absurd. Highest mountain in the park is Good Mountain, but it goes as low as 400 feet above sea level at the western part of the complex on the Skagit River. There's a couple of old-growth forests within North Cascades, still some of the only old-growth forests outside of, Mount Rainier and Olympic National Parks, the other two national parks we're going to be talking about, and I think that's pretty neat. And another interest, I'll do two more. Three more, excuse me, that third one's very fun. Over 300 glaciers, highest amount of flora diversity in any of the national parks, which just again goes to show like what not touching a piece of land will do for its ability to remain healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's wetland within the North Cascades National Park. There's a bunch of rivers going through and river valleys, and that wetland is maintained by a colony of beavers.
Beavers hard at work maintaining the park.
Beavers very hard at work. The wetland is very dependent on the beaver colony and vice versa. And if the beavers die,
oh no,
the wetland's cooked.
Yeah, mayhem.
So support your local beavers. What I say.
Local beavers.
Support local beavers. I suppose at this point is a good time as any to move on to Olympic National Park, our second national park. I think it's difficult to say whether this or Mount Rainier National Park is more famous, because I think like as a national park, Olympic's more famous, but as a mountain, Mount Rainier is more famous than Mount Olympus, of course.
Right.
I'm not sure everyone knows there is a Mount Olympus within Olympic National Park, because people assume like, oh, it's mostly forest, whole rainforest and all of that sort of thing. They got Mount Olympus there.
Interesting. Fascinating. They got moose there.
They do got moose there. I believe the subspecies is the Roosevelt moose that lives in that area. I'll talk a little bit more later on about this, but there are a lot of species within Olympic National Park that actually I can speak on right now if I can find it in my ears, that are like endemic specifically to the land around Olympic National Park. There are shrews, the Olympic chipmunk, the Olympic marmot, pocket gopher, salamander. There's one species of salamander that only lives in the national park. 3 species of fish. One of them is a mud minnow. I don't know what mud minnow exactly means. I assume like a lungfish sort of deal, but
something aquatic was probably.
The Hubert skipper butterfly, maca copper butterfly, the Olympic grasshopper. It jumps over gasoline. Oh geez. Anyway, let's see. Olympic National Park. History of this national park, same thing as in North Cascades, thousands of years ago beginning. There are 8 contemporary tribes within the Olympic Peninsula itself: the Maca tribe, the Quillette tribe, the Hoh tribe, the Quinault tribe, the Skokomish tribe, the Port Gamble Sklallam, the Jamestown Sklallam, and the Lower Ella Klallam, that have, throughout all of history, essentially, as we think of it, lived in the area, and they continue to have relations to the park and the region of the area. And throughout this pre-colonial period, these native populations primarily used the land as fishing grounds and hunting grounds. However, there are more recent specifically, reviews than archaeological surveys that would suggest more heavy usage, more like further usage of the land than what was typically assumed by previous surveys. They did more things in the area than I think they did within, especially within the mountain regions and the subalpine meadows. I think there was an assumption previously that was more constricted to the coast, and then they'd go up there primarily as like a hunting grounds. And I think
There's more evidence to show like further human activity in the area. You're saying.
further activity just beyond like this sort of thing.
Interesting.
And, ever since the 1880s, we've seen a lot more focus being placed on like the beauty of the natural region. There was a pretty big exploration of the peninsula's interior by naturalist John Muir and Congressman James Wickersham with Lieutenant Joseph O'Neill, and they went into the peninsula's interior, and upon seeing like the beauty of the area, the rainforest and all of that, they're like, we should create a national park in the area. And this, in the same way as North Cascades, and this is kind of a recurring theme, as more settlement happened in the region, there's more people in there, there's heavier logging. These are rainforest lands, there's a lot of forest in there. Logging starts to pick up, and people get worried that the natural beauty of the area is going to get threatened. The specific term that the National Park website is, once people got the first glimpses of clear-cut hillsides, people started to get worried, and they started to want to protect the land more, especially as with the invention of the car, people want to start touring. They want to go to these remote places, these natural places, especially if they live in areas that aren't as natural as this area is. So it was created as a forest reserve in 1897, actually.
Wow.
And then in 1909, President Roosevelt designated part of it as a national monument, as Mount Olympus National Monument, in order to protect the habitat of a population of elk that was in steep decline. The Roosevelt elk was in steep decline. We must only wonder why he was worried about that specific elk population.
Right. Well,
I'm
he
sure.
knew they had the same name.
Yeah.
Like they
He was
must have been in contact.
They were actually cousins.
They're cousins. You can believe this.
You would believe it. And then, so there had been proposals since actually the 1890s, back to that, that was a loud noise, back to the expedition by Muir and Wickersham and O'Neill through the Olympic Peninsula, that it should be a national park. And so after it was created into a national monument by Theodore Roosevelt in 1937, Franklin Roosevelt comes back and he says, okay, this is pretty cool. We're going to make this into a full national park in 1937. And so that's then the act is signed in 1938, and a small piece on the Olympic coast that's also part of Olympic Natural Park that's not directly connected to the main thing. The main thing, of course, is like the central area of the Olympic Peninsula. That gets added in 1953. And that Olympic National Park, the natural beauty of it is so astounding, actually, that it was designated as a International Biosphere Reserve in the Man and Biosphere Program by UNESCO in 1976, and it became a World Heritage Site in 1981, as it is considered an irreplaceable treasure of outstanding universal virtue.
That's quite a way to put it. It is a very beautiful park.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, you get through the area, and you just look at like the list of all these national parks. Keeled jumping slug, one final endemic species.
We love a good jumping slug.
We love a good jumping slug. They've got a couple of Olympic violet, Piper's bellflower, also endemic to the region. You just look at the list of species that are only found there, and it becomes pretty visible in how important it is.
Mm-hmm.
This is primarily because it's one of the last tracts of intact primeval forest in the lower 48 states. So there are a lot of threatened and endangered species that relied on these sorts of forests, and they're not around as much anymore. But they're around here. And they're around in the Olympic Mountains, and that's nice. I think that's nice, viewer.
It is very nice. Something that I was going to mention is that, the kind of the goal of preservation and conservation in a way ought to be this kind of appreciation for a prehistoric land and world that existed before we were ever here. I oftentimes imagine what it must have been like to be around in the, Jurassic era or something like that. And while we're never going to get a glimpse of that, we do get a glimpse of, like you said, this kind of untouched area of just pure nature and a ecosystem that's been developed over thousands, if not millions of years into what it is today. And I highly appreciate those kinds of places around here.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, just the natural beauty of the area is amazing. And speaking of natural beauty, we'll go over a couple of the most notable features of Olympic National Park now before we move on to our third park. Olympic Mountains are a basalt and sedimentary mountain range that formed about 18 to 57 million years ago. And then they, over time, eroded into the rugged peaks of the Olympic Mountains. Tallest one is Mount Olympus, if you would believe it, reaching 7,980 feet. And similarly, in this sort of rugged, rocky thing, there's on the coastline of the park that was added in 1953, that sort of area, there are sea stacks. Now, what a sea stack is like a several story tall stack of rock and stone that look like they're almost about to fall over. Just these massive rocky upright sort of thing. Originally the like high cliffs originally at sea level that washed away the mudstone of the region. But underneath the mudstone are more strong volcanic outcroppings that remained, long after the mudstone is eroded away.
Yeah, interesting.
And because of that, you've got these pretty big pillars that almost look like they're defying gravity, almost look like they're, like, oh, that's kind of cool.
How is that even standing? Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, it's a massive piece of rock that's connected to the rock underneath it. Fair enough, I suppose. And I think the biggest and most alluring part of it to a lot of people is the Hoh rainforest. The Hoh River comes down from Mount Olympus and goes to the native coast. We know that the word Hoh comes from a Native American language. There's some debate as to what word it originally comes from. There's a Quillette word, Ahualit, meaning fast-moving water or snow water. But there's some people that would argue it comes from the Quinault word for boundary, and a third that says it translates to man with quarreling wives. Personally, I think I most believe the fast-moving water or snow water explanation, just because of the river itself is fast-moving water coming down from, glacier, as snow water is beating. The whole rainforest, just the fact that it's a rainforest in the continental United States is already kind of a interesting thing in itself. It gets 140 inches of precipitation every year. The mosses and the ferns grow up through the region, and there's a otherworldliness to it. I've been to Hoh rainforest actually, and it's distinct from anything you see.
The fact that there's a rainforest at this latitude, rather, usually rainforests much closer to the equator, it's quite fascinating.
No, it's a pretty big marvel. It's a lucky trick of just the high levels of precipitation in the region, and it's very nice that it's something that's been protected like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely, if you drive through that highway up to Port Angeles, you pass through Olympic National Park, and you can just see the moisture in the air in the mornings. The fog is so thick, sometimes you can't even see even feet in front of you. Yeah, it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, there's only the one road in the whole rainforest. For a little bit previously this year, I believe it actually was washed out. The road was. Mm-hmm. If I'm correct, it's back up for use right now as of the recording of this podcast, but I could also be wrong, and that would be very sad, because that's the only road actually to get into it. Although there's a degree where it's like, well, it gives it a little time off,
right?
A little time to fully recuperate, get back into
breathe a little bit,
full natural state of things. That might be pretty good for it. All right, and our final national park in Washington State, Mount Rainier National Park, centered around actually Mount Adams. It's centered around Mount Rainier, if you would believe it. And we'll go into history again, actually, if you would believe it. So once again, the tribes of the region for many, many centuries and millennia used the region as an area and used the mountain and the area directly surrounding a mountain for resource gathering, for you know hunting mountain goats. You go gather huckleberries. You can collect. They collected the cedar bark of the in the lower elevation, and they made baskets and hats out of it. And you can fish in the rivers flowing from the mountain. It was a pretty important area for the lifestyle that they had. It was a pretty important area in general, I'd say. And a lot of a notable fact about Mount Rainier is the the excuse me, a lot of the tribes associated with the mountain have their own name for it. Primarily, if you look at the list of them, the one that stands out the most and the one that sees most use today as like the native name for the mountain is Tacoma or Tahoma. Uh, and the name Mount Rainier comes from Captain George Vancouver of Vancouver Island fame and Vancouver, Canada fame. And he also named Victoria, I believe. He named,
Yeah.
yeah, he named a lot of things are named after him. He named a lot of things, but in 1792 he was surveying the mountain. Well, excuse me, he was surveying the Pacific coast, and he saw the mountain, and he decided to name it after his good friend Rear Admiral Peter Rainier. Rainier never, of course, saw the mountain in person, but
That's what I would have done.
well,
I was there would have been Mount Ian.
thank you,
Mount
thank
Ian
you.
Lovell. That's what it would have been.
Please refer to this as Mount Lovell from every waking moment.
From now until the end of time, yes.
Thank you. Oh, geez. Three tribal treaties were in 1854 to the 1855 in Medicine Creek, Point Elliott, and the treaty with the Yakima. And in those areas, in those treaties, the lands around Mount Rainier used by Nisqually, Puyallup, Stiliacoom, Squaxin, Yakima, and the other tribes of the region were ceded to the federal government with provisions that the native peoples could still continue to hunt and gather around the land. And the first non-native usage of the area was used as it was primarily mountaineers who wanted to be like, first got to climb all the way to the top of Mount Rainier, given it's the biggest peak in the Cascade and the biggest peak in the region. So the first recorded climb of the mountain was made by P.B. Van Trump and General Hazard Stevens in 1870s. They were led to a base camp near Paradise. There was a native guide known as Sluskin who led them to the base camp, and obviously a lot of other peoples would follow, try and continue counting. Notable one in 1883, a man named James Longmire, coming down from summiting the mountain, found a mineral spring on the way down, opened a hotel and spa there, and that would eventually become the Longmire region that served as one of the first headquarters of Mount Rainier National Park. And in a recurring theme for this episode, logging industries. We love to log. Timber interest, found the region soon enough because there's, again, a lot of natural forest, natural beauty. We've said this 3 times now. Logging industry kind of looks like, hey, that's some good logging lands. But there is a lot of pushback, especially because, Mount Rainier is the biggest mountain region. There's just some special uniqueness to it. And so.
And again, the park itself, beauty beyond all comprehension.
Oh, yeah. There's a reason a large portion of it is just literally called Paradise.
Yeah, yeah.
So, about a square 35 miles on the sides of the square were created as the Pacific Forest Reserve in 1893, and then it was renamed to the Mount Rainier Forest Reserve with and large boundaries to the west and south of the mountain. This time there were also mining claims and surveying of the region for minerals and all of those sorts of things. And as time went on, a lot of conservation groups, local businesses, mountaineers, and scientists and the like saw the value in Mount Rainier. And despite all the disparate interests that they had in the mountain, they started a lobbying campaign in 1893 that primarily stressed the use potential of tourism. It stressed the unsuitability of land for agricultural need and the necessity to preserve the glacial landscape for further study and enjoyment and all that thing. And after the government was assuaged that the park would not become a strain on the government's expenses, in 1899, Mount Rainier became the nation's fifth national park.
Oh wow.
So it's number five.
Number five.
Number five.
It was that beautiful. They had to get it in there.
And as about the next decade went on, increased automobile accessibility to the park. The road in Nisqually Entrance Road, Government Road, as it was sometimes called in 1904, and that was made to get people through the Longmire region and then to the Paradise region. And the road to Paradise Park finished in 1911, and that made that a lot easier to access the park. Ballooning visitation in the region, and within that same time period, Congress ceased allowing. They passed legislation to ban further mining claims, and over the next decades, the remaining mining claims were slowly closed. Now, during the Great Depression, visitation fell pretty badly for obvious reasons,
Right.
and they had some strange little side quest sort of things. There was a 9-hole golf course at Paradise. They were planning a ski lift, and with the New Deal, people from the Civilian Conservation Corps started to come to work on trail construction, improvement in campgrounds, improving forest fire protections, and then in 1931, the park was expanded even further. And then, of course, after World War II, baby boom, post-war economic miracle, all that sort of things, that greatly increased the visitation to the park. And because of that, the park sought to upgrade and expand their visitor facilities and relieve the congestion in the park. That was Mission 66 was the name of it. Exemplify, greater use of cars, shorter stays, growing usage, and the program provided money for new buildings, roads, and trails to ease the congestion that the park had started to become. And, this also unfortunately led to a pretty decreased interest in natural resource programs and natural environmental monitoring, which the funding in that decreased for at least a decade, if not more. But as it got even more popular, the park continued to get even more popular, greater realization of need for preservation started to pick up. They made a new management plan for the wilderness areas aimed to minimize damage to the wilderness, and then in 1988, 97% of the park was designated as wilderness, giving it greater protection against the development, prevent like another golf course from going up on the side of the mountain. As much as I love golf,
Oh, we don't need another 9 holes.
we need 18.
We need 18, that's right.
We need 18. Oh, jeez.
I have a question. Mount Rainier is an active volcano.
Yes.
So how likely is it that when I'm there, it's going to just erupt?
Low but never zero. Actually, I do have something written down about this. Oh, geez. Oh, yeah. It's an episodically active composite volcano. It's also called a stratovolcano, and it's been for 1.5 million years. It's been volcanically active, right? And it's been erupting over the past 500,000 years. And the most recent one was 1,000 years ago. Now, there's typically a very low chance of Mount Rainier erupting, like very low, and it's always being monitored. But the hazards that would come if it did, finally blow its lid like Mount St. Helens did many decades ago now.
Which is quite the eruption.
Oh, yeah. That would threaten large parts of the Puget Sound, Seattle, Tacoma, would be in the way of the pyroclastic flow, and well, I'm not sure exactly if it would be the pyroclastic flow or like the ramifications of it,
Mm-hmm.
but
Some combination.
yeah, it would be bad enough as like ramifications go on that it's like, ooh, we're gonna name this as one of the decade volcanoes in the United Nations report. And so that's hope that that doesn't happen because that would be unfortunate.
Make sure you know your evacuation routes.
Make sure you do. Another nice thing about another nice thing about
Other than
another
volcanic ash, another nice thing.
it's the tallest mountain in the Washington, the Cascades Peak. I think that's just a
Very
generally
cool.
speaking pretty fun fact. Biggest outside of California and Colorado, I believe. There might be one other state, but I think we've got the third highest in the lower 48.
Mm.
10,000 to 11,000 people attempt to climb each year. About 50% succeed. Tragically, approximately 7% of mountaineering deaths within the United States are resultant to Mount Rainier, with about 2 deaths occurring every year.
Wow.
It's not a particularly dangerous mountain. Well, it is a reasonably dangerous mountain, but a lot of that is also just because of how popular it is as a mountaineering thing.
Right.
Uh, this is where we get the term flying saucers from.
Is it?
Yeah, 1947, a man named Kenneth Arnold sees 9 unidentified flying objects.
That's
His description of it is where we get flying saucers as a term for flying objects.
Unidentified. Yeah.
UFOs. Well, we don't get the term UFO from them, but we get the term flying saucer as like a synonym for UFO. 28 major glaciers on Mount Rainier. Emmons Glacier is the largest, and the Carbon Glacier has the lowest altitude of terminus for all of the glaciers in the lower 48 states. And they monitor them to this day just because of fears of climate change and all of that, causing major issues for the glaciers in the region.
You never think about the glaciers that are in the state itself, right? I feel like it's not really something people talk about. It's interesting.
We have a mountain called Glacier Peak,
They do.
which is not in Mount Rainier National Park. And with that, I think we've gone through the history of the region. I hope history of the 3 national parks and their creation, as well as some like other assorted fun facts throughout the history of the national parks. I hope you had a pretty good time. I did.
I had a great time. Honestly,
Flying.
No, it was fantastic. I didn't know any of this before this podcast, and so I feel enlightened and as well as motivated to visit these 3 parks this summer. So I'm going to make it my mission to explore and hike more, and so this is going to be a fun start to that.
And if you would believe it, I believe that is the end of our podcast. However, Alf, is it your podcast next week?
Next week, keep an eye out for my podcast, Guests to be Determined.
Yes, to be determined.
Guests to be Determined. We're going to figure that one out real soon here. But yeah, thanks for having me, and this has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having him. And to the viewers at home, remember to watch Alf's podcast next week, or else you'll be very sad.
We're saving the best for last, or rather the worst for last.
Oh.
It'll be a great time.